With Terminator Genisys soon to grace our cinemas almost less than 2 months from now, I thought I'd share some thoughts and theories I have regarding the franchise. A brief overview of the franchise and what I thought of it is worth sharing, what I thought of the movies as a whole. Terminator 1 is a suspenseful action flick with well-realised characters. Terminator 2 took it a step higher, and both these movies gave us Sarah Connor, from her meek and mousy beginnings to her hardened and severely damaged middle, to her hopeful end. Definitely one of the best female protagonists I have seen in a while. Terminator 3 was a good movie on its own, but as a Terminator film, it's only decent. There is more bad than good, tragically, but at least the John Connor arc was enough to carry you through the film with some decent comedic moments. And Terminator Salvation, while a competently shot action flick and special effects demo, was nothing outstanding, and the writing was atrocious. Though I will say Marcus Wright's story, though mostly overshadowed a lot, was interesting for what it was, at least. 2 cinematic masterpieces and 2 just plain okay movies we have. Now we are approaching the 5th installment in the franchise, with a strangely spelt title, but I can get past that here. There will be spoilers in this video, so I'd advise you guys to halt watching this video unless you've seen the other movies and the Terminator Genisys trailers and TV spots. See those and then return here. You have been warned. Also, I will not be talking about the Sarah Connor TV show, and despite familiarizing myself with it on the Wikia page of the Terminator series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles takes place in a different timeline to that of Terminator 3, Salvation and Genisys. With that out of the way, let's get started. After sitting through all the Terminator films and even the Genisys trailers, I've noticed an interesting quirk, especially with regard to Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, and Terminator Salvation. I noticed this especially in those two. Due to the time travel, John Connor and Skynet have made themselves more powerful than they were in the original film, and presumably with each passing installment, and they are preparing themselves for counterattacks. Let me explain. In the original film, the T-800s first appeared in 2027, but in Terminator Salvation, 2018 is when they first appeared. This says to me that due to both parties interfering with the past, it has allowed them to build better and stronger equipment to counter each other. TechCom, also known as the Resistance, have sound equipment that disables Terminators and HKs, or Hunter-Killers. In the original film and Terminator 2, the Resistance were limited on some of the equipment they had, such as aircraft being one example, and also a submarine. They had laser guns to be sure, but were still limited in the vehicles that they possessed. In Terminator 3, John is in the bunker and answers the call of the general that is contacting the bunker. Presumably the survivors from the army inquire as to what is going on, and maybe perhaps ask John what threat the machines possess, and maybe perhaps as a result of the change in the timeline here, John is able to rally the Resistance with better equipment, presumably handing leadership status over to the remaining military leaders, as he feels he isn't ready to take up the mantle. Or if he had leadership status from Terminator 3 onwards, it was simply to get the ball rolling. At least at this point in time. In the original timeline, it was John who gathered the Resistance together, teaching many how to smash the Terminators and push them back. But after a change in the timeline due to the events in Terminator 3, John feels he isn't ready to lead yet, so he trusts the military leaders while at the same time giving them assistance they need. However, having said that, I don't think he was giving in-depth knowledge of the Terminators when he started out, as he didn't possess that knowledge until he came into contact with them again late in his older years. On the other side of the spectrum, there's a lot more detail here, the development of Terminators more advanced than the T-800. Many of the new Terminators were not there in the original timeline, with the possible exception of the T-1000, which may not have been completed but still worked on, although it is possible that the T-1000 was already active but not ready for release yet. It's only because of the time travel that T-1000s and TXs and subsequent Terminator models could even be developed. It is thanks to their interference with history that perhaps other Terminator prototypes could be developed in the near future. I am somewhat familiar that the T-800 and the T-1000 were sent back almost at the same time, and that John sent Kyle and the Uncle Bob Terminator back afterward. I'm just simply making a point that thanks to what happened in the franchise generally, Skynet becomes stronger thanks to the time travel trips. In Terminator 2, we learned that after the first T-800's destruction, its chip and arm were used by Miles Dyson to build Skynet unknowingly. I say unknowingly because he was building Skynet with the intention that it would benefit mankind, not destroy mankind. Assuming Skynet was created by some other means in the original timeline by Miles Dyson, the arm and chip helped advance his research and enable him to create Skynet. Not necessarily at a faster rate, but certainly allowed him to refine Skynet properly, something he may not have been able to do as well as he could had the chip and arm been absent. With the death of Miles Dyson, as well as the destruction of Cyberdyne systems and the destruction of the Terminator body parts, not only did this delay Judgment Day, the attack on humanity by Skynet, but the military who picked up Dyson's work had allowed them to take time to refine Skynet even more. Technology in real life can develop quite quickly over a few years. Contrast iPods today to when iPods were first released. Amazing what a decade of refinement can do. Think of how much refinement Skynet had in the hands of the military. It would also explain why the T-800 in Terminator Salvation could withstand molten steel being dumped onto it, while in Terminator 2 the steel melted the T-800. Though that could have been just down to the quantity of steel. Now this is where the trailer from Terminator Genisys comes in, and to warn you guys, again, there are spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, don't look any further until you've checked the trailers out. You have been warned. The explanation about Skynet that I have provided would also explain why the T-3000, the newest Terminator revealed, is the latest of the Terminators to exist. Every single Terminator after the T-800 only exists because of the trips back in time and the alterations made to the past, be it reverse-engineered Terminator parts or a longer development time. These factors have allowed Skynet not only to become more advanced, but also create more advanced Terminators. I believe even Terminator Salvation provides a basis for the development of the T-3000 as well as the development hypothesis in general. Marcus Wright himself is a sort of Terminator hybrid, both man and machine in one, and judging by the trailer of Terminator Genisys, though I'm not sure, John Connor himself has either been transformed into a T-3000, or somehow his DNA was retrieved by Skynet and used as a template to build the T-3000. Whatever the case, Skynet has constantly been building and developing new Terminators and compensating for the shortcomings of many of the earlier models. As I've said before, in the original film, the T-800s first appeared in 2027, but in Terminator Salvation, 2018 is the year they first appeared. Not only does Skynet develop more advanced Terminators than the T-800, it also develops previous Terminator models at a faster rate, or even in some cases make adjustments to compensate for shortcomings. I had already mentioned the whole issue of the steel thing, and that ties into this. The fact that a T-800 was able to survive molten steel being dumped onto him. Marcus Wright again comes into play for two reasons. One which I'll get into later, but here Skynet is able to obtain information through Marcus from John, though Marcus is not aware of this. I'm not absolutely sure of this. This is only conjecture on my part. That incident with Marcus and John in the interrogation scene says to me that most Terminators carry a recording device of some sort in their system, which they transfer to Skynet and give it new information. Whether this works even when a Terminator is sent back in time or not is another issue, but if a Terminator is able to send information to Skynet despite being in a different era of history, kind of like what Doctor Who was able to do with Rose Tyler's phone, this would mean that Skynet would be able to ascertain what John, Sarah and Kyle would do in the past to them. and adjust itself accordingly should a shift in the timeline occur. However, this theory I have about the information transfer over time and space is tenuous at best and outlandish at worst. Also, whether or not the ability to transfer information to Skynet as Marcus did in the interrogation scene, whether that is exclusive to Marcus or whether other Terminators possess that ability, I don't know. But that's pretty much all I have to say about the strength of John Connor and Skynet increasing in power. The other speculation I have is the nature of Terminator Genisys itself and how it relates to its predecessors. Wikipedia kinda has this speculation that I have, but kinda doesn't. Then again, Wikipedia can be written by anyone practically, and most info there can change. As I mentioned in a previous video on the subject of the Spider-Man cinematic universe which failed to meet expectations of audiences in the Sony Cinematic Universe video that I did, I had said that Terminator Genisys is a retcon of the Terminator franchise. Despite what Wikipedia and other sources have said about the film, I am convinced Terminator Salvation is not a reboot. It is a retcon. Much like Days of Future Past, retconning the original trilogy of X-Men films, and of course to a certain degree Star Trek 2009 functions as a retcon. Although it differs slightly from Days of Future Past, it establishes an alternate reality from the original series and the subsequent spin-offs and sequel series, but it also follows on from the Prime continuity. It doesn't prevent the Prime continuity from existing, but just simply creates an alternate timeline to exist alongside it. I mistakenly call Star Trek 2009 a reboot, and even if you want to call it a reboot, it loosely follows off from where the Prime timeline finished and branches off into a different reality, thanks to the fact that the late Leonard Nimoy appeared as Spock Prime in that film. Terminator Genisys, I believe, follows on from Terminator Salvation, and there are reasons to derive this conclusion, though this is conjecture on my part. But I still believe there is a solid basis for it, not only because of the Terminator Genisys trailer itself, but also the events from Terminator Salvation, specifically the interrogation scene again. Skynet reveals that it has been observing the interrogation scene, and you know what that means. Skynet now knows who John's father is, and man oh man is John in trouble. And this is where Terminator Genisys comes in. A T-1000, who isn't played by Robert Patrick, but instead by Lee Byung-hun, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, is intercepting Kyle Reese at the clothes store where Carl is gathering his clothes and hiding from the police. This is the way I believe Terminator Genisys ties in with the 4 previous movies. It's one gradual story, a battle across time, with 2 sides becoming more powerful, changing the timeline, and of course causing many fans to bang their head in frustration at trying to rectify all the paradoxes that are present in the films. Thanks to one mistake from John Connor in Terminator Salvation, Skynet now has a new drastic measure to defeat John Connor once and for all. John Connor himself. And the Genisys program, possibly. I don't know what exact role the Genisys program is going to play. We'll just have to wait and see when the film comes out. If Terminator Genisys can redeem the franchise, boy howdy, are we in for a treat. Isn't it interesting to note that despite the atrocious writing that Terminator Salvation has, it's nice that it kind of functions as a bridge between the original trilogy and this new trilogy starting with Terminator Genisys. No, I'm not kidding. Apparently Paramount have announced that there will be 2 more Terminator films after Terminator Genisys, though it is probably safe to assume that these sequels will only come to pass depending on how successful or how much of a failure Terminator Genisys will turn out to be. But hey, Age of Ultron managed to defy my expectations, and of course it gave way to one of Marvel's greatest movie villains, Ultron. Not to mention, Age of Ultron has actually successfully gotten past the $1 billion mark at the box office. Terminator Genisys might not make as much money, it may not be as well received, but who knows? We'll just have to wait and see when the film comes out. Thank you for taking the time to watch.